thank you for thank you for giving us some of your time today on this Friday to have a chat about all things Blood Incantation and the new release and really everything else that's going on with the band. Really just wanted to start off with asking about the new release. It's a complete 180 from what people have had in the past from yourselves. Just wanted to find out what was the, how did you come with the decision that you wanted to go with this direction on this new release of the full on ambient release with Timewave Zero?
Well, I don't personally consider it to be a 180-degree pivot. I consider it to be a stripping away of one element and allowing another innate element, which we've had as an integral part of our sound for 10 years, to able to be embellished and expanded upon. So, to your question, when we started the band, it was as simple as we're going to have an ambient record for our third record.
Okay.
And so we're going to deliberately increase the atmospheric components, starting from our demo, which begins with a sing bowl and some synthesizer percolation. And then the demo dissolves into a synthesizer melt at the outro, and there's synths on every track and clean guitars and whatnot. And we'll do an instrumental track on the first album, with synths bookending each track. Yep. And then the second album we'll do a full-on instrumental fusion song, prog, ambient, metal, whatnot, for inner paths, as well as having the extended sequencer interlude in the middle of Awakening. And we also had an 18-minute ambient track on the B-side of the cassette and CD versions of our self-released live Vitrification album. And so following that linear trajectory of increased atmospheric components one step at a time, this is actually the most natural progression we could have taken for a next step after Hidden History. So it was just part of the plan, man. So that's just what we're doing here,
Okay. With you obviously having these elements within your music, was there any difference in the way that you'd normally write or compose this kind of material, with it just being, as you said, a stripped away version of things you've already had within your back catalogue? Was there a different way in which you would look to compose it, or was it a very natural kind of way for you to progress as songwriters?
Well, I think it can be natural as well as a new way, without having the safety net of the instruments that we're most comfortable on, in a context of songwriting and musical preparation that we're most accustomed to. We had to relearn how to communicate with each other in a totally new environment, but our natural way to play with each other, which is to say, we like certain types of progressions, we like certain types of melodies and counterpoint, we stack riffs or take things away underneath and whatnot in the same process, but without being limited to a finite number of frets or certain types of, acceptable drum beats or riffing patterns or whatnot. It's actually more difficult, but still more fun. And inspiring to be in that type of an environment. Okay.
Were you saying you're having to kind of learn how to do that? Is there anything that you particularly did as a group to be able to achieve that, or was it a case of just communicating with each other and gradually working on these on this?
Well, yeah, it was a process. Absolutely, of kind of learning a new language, but at the same time, like Paul said, we kind of approached it in a similar way. That being said, too, our past, recordings and a lot of our songs were primarily written by one person, usually Paul or myself, and it'd usually be one person, alone, writing guitar riffs and then bringing those to the band. Then we also had a couple other tracks, namely Inner Paths to Outer Space and Hovering Lifeless, that were improvised as a band, and then, each person kind of contributing, and then, forming the song that way. But most of the time it would be, one composer. This was kind of a new trajectory for us, taking the whole album and improvising from the get-go to kind of like start the writing process. But then once we got to the actual writing, everybody was involved.
With regard to obviously how the album has been composed and put together, is it something that is purely a studio-based project, or in the right circumstances, could it be something that you would look to replicate in a live setting?
Not at all. We just played it live a couple weeks ago here at the Gothic Theater in Denver.
Ah, okay. Was not aware of that. Okay. So is it something that you would be then looking to continue to do as a group?
Under the right circumstances, we could, but as of now, the production of it is a really big process, and to be able to take that on the road would require a level of crew and production that we don't have yet.
Okay.
Not to say it's impossible. Like, there could be an evening with Blood Incantation in some city where one night we would do the ambient record at like a planetarium or a special venue, and then the following evening we would play a death metal set at a venue or something like that.
So it's something that's got a very visual component to it as well as the musical.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you mind?
Also, the logistics of it, like Morris said, that we would need a whole crew to accommodate the setting up and breaking down of everything. It took us nearly 4 hours just to get everything cabled up and connected before we could even begin to sound check for the release show. And that's not really practical for do this every single day and then break it down and keep driving, So the imprint or the footprint of the synth backline is substantial, and so the only opener we could have would have to be a special guest who can sit kind of in the middle of all of it. Yeah. Because we're not going to spend 4 hours setting that up just to take it down after sound check. So.
Okay. I take it in the studio as well. It was quite a complex setup to get everything ready for you to obviously record and get it basically at the point where you guys were ready to go and get it recorded.
Yeah, I mean the whole record was recorded live to tape, so that means that all four of us, were hooked up and ready, as if we were playing that show that we did at the Gothic. Very much a similar situation. We actually did have to utilize both the control room in the studio and also an isolation booth. Two of us were in the control room. Two of us were in the isolation booth, taking up the entire space of the that level.
Yeah, very. It was like a hoarder's paradise. Very limited pathways to walk within.
Okay.
But at the same time, it was an interesting process for us too, because Jeff and I, we were together, and so we could see Paul and Morris through some glass, but we couldn't necessarily talk to them. So we had to use visual cues at some points to kind of make sure that we were all on the same page, which is something that we've kind of learned to do even from back in our metal stuff. But this kind of required an even more complex way.
What was the overall kind of time frame to actually record, with you saying obviously it being you needing the visual cues and it being done to tape? Was it something that you were able to wrap? What was the overall time frame that you were in the studio doing it? It's probably the easiest way for me to ask that question. Sorry.
I think it was just a week.
Just a week.
Yeah.
Similar. The mixing really took most of the time, honestly.
It was similar.
Assembly and the mixing.
Yeah, it was similar to our metal records in that we kind of booked, a week or 10 days essentially, and really focused in on the record for, recording. Like for example, an album like Starspawn was really recorded only in 4 days, and then the mixing process for that was about
5, but still short.
But then the mixing process was like 2 or 3. And then for Hidden History, that was even longer. I think it was like 10 or 12 days. But like the recording process was more like 5 days or maybe 7 days. And then the mixing process was even more elaborate. This one was maybe closer to the Star Spawn timeline, but even still, like the mixing process was pretty involved. And then we also did the 5.1 mix at a later time, which was also very involved.
With regard to obviously the mixing of it, is that something that that you were all involved with doing, or is it were a case of obviously handing it over to you to
No. Every record we do, you're hearing a production that we all four, in conjunction with the engineers, sat down and made it exactly that way.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, to us, it's an important process to be, no matter what band it is.
No matter what band, that's crazy.
It's well, some people do that, but yeah, no. To us, it's like, okay, we need, we consider the mix to be an integral part of the art, and so that's something that we want to be involved in. I think a lot of our records will say like produced by Pete DeBoer and Blood Incantation, that sort of thing. So we're always there from like day one.
You want to make sure that what you've laid down on tape, the final product is gonna meet your high expectations, and then so you can obviously present it to your fan base, so they know that it's truly yours. If that makes sense.
We're paying for it, we may as well see the whole thing through.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I can imagine there are some artists that don't mind having other people meddle in their stuff, and that's fine, especially if you trust someone, I guess. But to us, it's like, the more, it's not about, necessarily control, but it's about just like, being there to help the process along, especially because we know the music really well,
Exactly. I mean, think of it as a fan of other people's CDs. When you listen to a CD or a record or whatnot, as a musician, one of the first things you analyze is the production and the mix and how things are all put together. You hear the music, you understand the arrangements, but when you contemplate the presentation of the total package, now is your time. When you're mixing your record, now is your time to do all the things you would change about these other records. Where you're like, I wish these vocals weren't so up front, or I wish this drum had more reverb, or I wish this guitar solo was a little more hot. I wish the bass was a little more up front. That's your time that you're paying for to make that happen.
It's an integral part of recording. I think it's just as important as laying down the tracks.
Yeah. You can only polish a turd so much, so you got to, it's equal parts. You got to play it right, and you got to take the time to mix it correctly.
Well, an interesting example of this is, for example, the album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by the Beatles, where the original mono mix was actually with the band in the room, and then George Martin went and did the stereo mix by himself. And you can tell that, the mono mix has a lot more involvement from the band members, because they know that music in and out. They can say, oh, this part, whatever. There's even like
little embellishment here and this little harmony.
There's even like effects on the vocals that are not present on the stereo mix that were on the mono mix, So that's just like a big famous, example of just kind of the differences. And it's not to say that like the stereo mix is terrible or bad, but like if you want to hear the band at their most true and the way that band wants you to hear it, then yeah, that's the way to do it.
With regard to the interest that you've got as individuals in the use of ambient melodies and tones within your music, is there a particular time in which you started taking interest in that kind of art form, and how you look to incorporate it within your music from the early years as a band?
I think we were all into that before we even started this band. That's part of the reason that our band has these eccentricities, because we all met with these things in common beforehand,
So
yeah, it's something that, when Paul and I first met, one of the things that we bonded over was that we not only both liked funeral doom like Thergothan, or, death metal like, Death, or, black metal stuff like that. We also bonded on like Brian Eno and, Pink Floyd and other stuff like that. So that was part of what made Blood Incantation what it is that we're fans of all kinds of music. Like that's what brought us together. And we're also all fans of other music, that is outside of what we maybe share, but that's kind of what makes it so interesting, is that there's like 4 individuals that kind of draw on all these different things.
So it was very much when you started the band, everyone had this. You were on the same page. There was no need to really have there was obviously in-depth conversations with regard to how you wanted to progress as a band. I mean, you've already said at the beginning of the interview that you said the third record was going to be this stripped down version of the elements that you've used within your earlier music, but you were all on the same page with where it needed to go, and it was just so you knew what the plan was. It was just a case of obviously ensuring that the music met your expectations when you were creating it.
I mean, yeah, it came out. The concept in the band was fully formed before anybody ever heard a rehearsal tape.
Yeah, I mean,
a lot of bands kind of go and they figure it out along the way, or they switch up their logos, or they switch their aesthetic, or change their lyrical content, or whatever. But the whole point of this one was that when we started it, we're like, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, even on Starspawn, it says, I think, like technical funeral ambient, it's like ambient has always been in our lexicon as for the band. We even joked about, calling it slambient, slam and ambient combined. But yeah, like that's something even from the early days that we were kind of, thinking about, and, going back to even just the EP, which was really going to be a demo, that included little ambient passages, and we just kind of over time, expanded that. And at the beginning, those parts were created by Paul, but on Hidden History, we were all involved in creating those soundscapes. And so that kind of, pushed us even further to make sure that everybody was involved.
With you saying that everyone, you were all on the same page when you started, and before anyone heard anything, you all had that in place. Do you feel that's helped you really get to the point and where you are, and the success that you've had as a group of musicians working together?
I mean, it's subjective because you can never know because of timing and being in the right place, right time, or whatever. And people make marketing a whole part of it, but our band was doing the same thing even on tour and putting out records when people didn't even really care about the first demo, the Interdimensional Extinction, and we were playing Starspawn material on our first West Coast tour for Interdimensional. And I think most bands would benefit from a more long game approach. Like I said, a lot of people change it up and they get they get a new aesthetic or a new logo or a new whatever. And I think that makes you more susceptible to the tides of trends and what's cool or hip or whatnot, and easier for people to get pushed around in that big ocean of impulse and stimuli. But when you come out fully formed and it's like, well, this is all we're trying to do. We've got it all laid out here for us and we know where we're going. Whatever happens after that is much easier to navigate because you have a strategy from the get-go.
So with you obviously having that long game approach, I assume that you've already got your next 2-3 years, and maybe even long. Do you have those plans kind of set in stone of where you're looking to go, or is it a case of you have the foundations there, and you'll obviously make adjustments as and when needed to reach what your final end game is?
Yeah, this is the first time the band has a clean slate. Timewave Zero was really a capstone to our existence up until this point, and we've constantly been catching up to ideas of older riffs in our previous records, and we're in a position now where we can write all new material on a level where we're all connected after having done something like Timewave Zero.
So doing this record is going to really assist you with further releases and the way you work together. Am I correct in understanding that? Okay.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for us, it was a big thing for us to kind of dive into this album without having written any of it, and that was like a huge kind of like catalyst to the inspiration of the record. And to that point, what Morris was saying, it's something that really has wiped the slate clean, and now we can go forward and like really anything is possible. And so for us, like the next record, we're already, the concept, and I think that's to what Paul was saying too. It's really important to us to create that concept and that like foundational idea of what something is. And then, when you get there, it's going to be a bit different and maybe even better or crazier than you could have imagined. But the point is that you set out and you set the controls, you know at least the direction where you're going. And so we've been, I mean, as a band, we talk about this like every time we get together. We're like, okay, next time, what are we going to do? And that's always going to be on our minds.
So the continuing to move forward is definitely something that you guys you're very focused on the forward plans.
Yeah, I mean we're all. I mean I speak for myself, but super ADD sometimes, and I get bored easily, and can't just do the same thing again. There's no reason for us to rest on our laurels.
Also, another thing to consider is that, we're in multiple bands. Each of us is in more than one band of varying degrees of styles and experimentalism in metal. And we've all been in bands for decades now, pushing in one way or the other. Some bands are more orthodox and straightforward. Some bands are totally experimental. It's just in the context of Blood Incantation that we're trying to make this point, And,
no, I understand, yeah.
So, for what BI is up to, we used to think the sky was the limit, but now the sky seems really small because, like, a record like Timewave is, like you said, a 180 or so, seemingly far out of our range. But now, if you have another buoy in this other part of this little ocean over here that sounds like Starspawn or Hidden History, between these two, you have this huge gulf of inspiration and potential, and we're just trying to navigate that in the most interesting and compelling way for us as fans of the music. And we're in the band because we like the music. We're not overly concerned with how it's interpreted. It's obviously great that people are interested in our band, but like I said earlier, we were on tour playing Starspawn material when people said that they didn't say anything about Interdimensional because nobody cared or listened to it. So we've all been in bands this whole time, and we're in different bands. I'm sure we're going to start new bands coming up in the future. So it's just music and all of these expressive potentials. That's just who we are as people, It's not fun for us to be limited in that respect.
In over the summer, you're coming to Europe and you're playing shows over here. I know they're playing in the UK at the Underworld, and there's a show in Ireland, and I assume the continent is very much being hit as well. Following that run of shows, do you have further tours being planned, or are you looking to go back and working to create more new music before the next tour cycle?
It's both. We are pretty inundated with so many itineraries which have been postponed and rescheduled and all these things for the last couple of years. So we didn't really get to tour Hidden History. We just did our first tour for it in December, which was kind of a spur-of-the-moment situation. I think we played our release show, and we did a lot of touring in 2019, but Hidden History came out just at the end.
Yeah.
And we did 2 shows in New York and the beginning of 2020, and then we were just waiting, and then it was until the end of 21 that we were able to even do anything. So even though it's been 3 calendar years since Hidden History, we played something like almost 300 shows for Starspawn leading up to Hidden History, you know what I mean? And then now we're just kind of in that limbo where it's like, man, we really want to get some more music coming, play some new material and do some stuff, but we didn't get that chance to bring Hidden History to people yet, so we're still trying to prioritize that for the next year or so.
Okay. with how in depth obviously your workings are to create music, is it something that whilst you're out on the road you can come up with ideas, or is it very much a case of you need to separate the road and creating from one another?
I would say, like, for us, going on the road is an integral part of us beginning the writing process, because, you know, for a long time, I mean, for both of our last records, you know, we would tour very extensively and then go write, you know, and record, and then, you know, tour extensively and then write and record, because then we would have the ability to almost understand our past music in a new way than we even did when we recorded it, and play it even better, and, you know, become better musicians because of it. For example, the Hidden History drum parts, you know, for me at the time, I could not really perform them at the level that I wanted to. And now, through the small touring that we've done since then, I've already, you know, discovered that I can, you know, hone in on that and make it better. So for us, it would be very important to make sure that we tour Hidden History, not just for us, but also for the fans, and really give that record its due before we embark on this next thing. And then we can bring all of those elements that we, you know, can make even better and hone in on, and bring them full force for the next album.
Speaking to the bringing those elements onto the next one, you can hear what we're talking about for this difference between just the performance on Starspawn and Hidden History, you know, and it's a lot more tight. Everything is a lot more precise and intense, and we're really anxious to be able to upgrade the Hidden History material in that same sense. You can hear the upgrade for the Starspawn material on our live record, Live Vitrification, where we play 2 songs from Starspawn much better than we recorded it. You know, the atmosphere on Starspawn is cooler because it's, you know, it's all on the record and has all the right production stuff, but the vibe and the performance on Live Vitrification is way more indicative of how it's actually performed at a show. And similarly, like Isaac was saying, as soon as we played, you know what, we recorded Hidden History in the summer of 2019, and then we played like 43 shows with Immolation in a row with it, you know, and by the time we got back, we're like, okay, now we're really ready to bring Hidden History to people, and then the world shut down. Yeah. So,
yeah, I mean, with obviously touring with Immolation, did you find that touring with that band, and with how much of a tight unit that they were, did you feel that reflected on your own performance, that you really, not that you wouldn't have stepped up, but that you really tried to up it as much as you can to make sure that you were giving people who were at that show the full Blood Incantation experience, whilst before they were obviously then going to see Immolation?
Yeah, I mean, we learned a lot from those guys. We just hung out with them the other day when they came through Denver. You know, our group chat is still active 3 years later, and those guys are our friends, you know. And the reason that I think, at least for a band who's been around for 30 years, you know, more than, the reason why they are able to continually succeed and to be on tour and still bring it every night is because, you know, they take it seriously. They show up, they load out, they have their own little crew, they do everything, you know, they don't outsource everything for someone else to take care of it. Like their feet are on the ground, and they're still DIY guys despite being professionals, you know? Mm. So being around those guys just kind of, it is inspiring to see. And it's also kind of reassuring that it's like, all right, if you just, you know, show up and do the work and stay focused or whatnot, then it's totally viable 30 years from now. You know, a lot of people, and, you know, ourselves too, when we were younger, we would party a lot and we would lose things on tour and we would be stupid about money and all these things. But once you try to get your ducks in a row, there's a whole world out there once you are at that level of like a, you know, casual professional or an adequate professional or whatnot. And once we saw that world, which was even before that tour, really, we were like, okay, this is what we got to do. You know, you can't just spend all your door money on beer and then drive and get burritos and then be late to the next show and then just party every night. You can't do that indefinitely. A lot of bands do, good for them, but you know, we can't do that. And when a band like Immo, they're killing it 35 years on because they don't do that either. So
Appreciate your time, guys. Is there anything that you want to add as the final bit of this interview before we sign off?
See you at the underworld.
Yeah, we'll see you there. Yeah, and thank you for taking the time, and thanks to all who listen to our band with an open mind.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you keep up to date with future episodes by subscribing to our channels. For more information on this podcast, or for all the latest music news, reviews, interviews and more, head over to our website, www.therazorsedge.rocks.